Welcome, crime fanatics, to the Guilty Files, True Crime Rewritten, where we take true crime to a whole new level. I'm your host, Dani, here to guide you on this thrilling journey, exploring justice through fact and fiction, and always delivering crime, twice told, with endless intrigue. The Guilty Files True Crime Rewritten is a podcast where we don't just walk you through the facts, we tear open the file, dramatize the edges, and bring it to life in ways you never saw coming. If you caught Brian's last episode, you already know the cold, hard facts of this week's case. But tonight, it's my turn. I'll be your navigator as we dive headfirst into the embellished and fictionalized world inspired by that same case file. We're about to unravel the what-ifs, dive into hidden motives, and explore alternate possibilities you didn't see coming. For those of you just joining us, a little about me. I'm not just your average armchair detective. With a dual degree in sociology and psychology, plus 5 years on the gritty streets of Atlanta as a beat cop, I bring a unique blend of insight, street smarts, and, if I say so myself, a wicked sense of humor to the table. So buckle up, because this ride is going to be part criminal psychology deep dive, part drama-filled crime thriller, and 100% entertaining. As always, our motto here is simple. 2 hosts, 1 crime, double the story. You got the facts earlier this week, and now it's time for us to pull back the curtain on the possibilities. Because in the world of the Guilty Files True Crime Rewritten, true crime is never just black and white. It's technicolor, reimagined, and a little guilty pleasure for your earbuds. So grab your headphones, settle in, and let's re-enter this story together. Tonight, I'm taking you back to the scene, but this time, we're rewriting the narrative. Welcome to the Guilty Files True Crime Rewritten. Let's get started. Tonight, we're revisiting one of the darkest chapters in American true crime history, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. You may think you've heard it all before. The facts are grisly enough, and my co-host, Brian, laid them out with precision last time. But tonight, we're pulling back the curtain and stepping into the shadows. What if we looked deeper into his victims? What if police procedures had been modernized? And what if the ghosts of Dahmer's deeds haunted more than just his psyche? Every story starts somewhere. And for Jeffrey Dahmer, it began in a home filled with secret, tension, and shadows that would shape his darkest impulses. Act 1, a home steeped in shadows. Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood often gets a single note in documentaries and news specials. Volatile parents, a cold upbringing, and a sense of alienation. But let's linger here for a moment and imagine the walls of that house in Milwaukee, thin, gray, and steeped in tension. Picture this: Lionel Dahmer, the brilliant but aloof graduate student, hunched over chemical equations, the fluorescent light casting sterile shadows across his workspace. Joyce, his wife, pacing the creaky floorboards upstairs. Her anxiety was palpable, like static in the air, making every argument sharp enough to cut. And then there was Jeffrey, a quiet child. Too quiet. You might see him crouched by a window, staring out at the wooded backyard. Maybe he's watching the squirrels dart up a tree. Or maybe he's thinking about what lies beneath their fur and bones. Did anyone ever think to ask? Or were they too wrapped up in their own storms? It was one of those evenings where the air in the Dahmer household felt too thick to breathe. The humid Wisconsin summer clung to the walls, amplifying the frustration between Lionel and Joyce. The kitchen lights buzzed faintly, and the faint clink of Lionel stirring his coffee was the only sound until Joyce's voice sliced through the stillness. Do you think this is sustainable, Lionel? You think I can just handle everything while you disappear into that lab?" Joyce's words dripped with venom, her voice trembling with years of pent-up resentment. Lionel didn't look up. His hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "Don't you dare, Joyce. Don't you dare pretend you've been handling anything. You're either in bed or popping pills. Who's handling Jeffrey, huh? Who's cleaning up the mess you leave behind?" "That's Rich," she snapped, her laughter brittle. "You're not raising him either. You barely even see him. Do you even know what grade he's in?" Lionel turned abruptly, his coffee sloshing over the rim of his mug. His voice, usually measured and calm, cracked with fury. "Don't make this about me. You're a wreck, Joyce. You've been a wreck since the day he was born, and don't think for a second that he hasn't noticed." Upstairs, Jeffrey sat cross-legged on his bed, his small frame hunched over a worn picture book. The muffled argument seeped through the floorboards, as it often did, but tonight it felt different. The words hit sharper, their anger reverberating in his chest. He dropped the book and crept to the window, seeking solace in the darkened backyard. Downstairs, the argument hit its crescendo. Lionel slammed his mug onto the counter, the sound ricocheting through the kitchen. "I can't, Joyce, I can't do this tonight." He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the back door. "I need air before I lose it." The screen door slammed shut behind him, and Lionel stepped into the sticky night. The moon cast a faint glow over the yard, the grass thick with dew. His breath came in sharp bursts, fists clenching and unclenching as he tried to burn off the rage. His gaze darted to a nearby tree, where a squirrel ran along a low branch. Its quick, jittery movements caught Lionel's eye, its carefree existence igniting something primal within him. Without thinking, Lionel grabbed a rock from the garden bed. It was small, smooth, and cool in his palm. The motion of throwing it was automatic, fueled by the boiling anger he'd carried inside all evening. The rock flew through the air, striking the squirrel mid-leap. The animal tumbled to the ground with a sharp, squealing cry. Lionel froze, the adrenaline of the throw mingling with instant regret. But the sound of the squirrel's feeble attempts to crawl away stirred something darker. He stalked toward it, each step heavier than the last. The squirrel twitched, its tiny chest heaving in shallow breaths. Lionel's vision blurred with frustration, guilt, and something unnameable. He lifted his foot and stomped down. Once, twice, again. Jeffrey watched from his window, the glass fogging slightly from his breath. He hadn't moved since the rock had left his father's hand, his wide eyes glued to the scene unfolding below. The squirrel's cries echoed faintly in his ears, a strange melody of pain and inevitability. As Lionel delivered the final blow, Jeffrey felt a strange tug in his chest. Not horror, not fear, but a dark curiosity. He didn't fully understand what he'd just witnessed, but it stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't name. His father's outburst had shattered a boundary he hadn't known existed, and it left a crack in Jeffrey's young psyche, one that would only widen with time. In the days that followed, the image of the injured squirrel haunted Jeffrey, but not in the way it might haunt most children. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, the arc of the rock, the twitching body, the stillness that followed. It wasn't the violence itself that lingered, it was the power. The act of turning something alive into something lifeless, of holding control over something so fragile. Reflecting on the psychology of a single moment, we can see how children are like mirrors. They reflect the world they're shown, absorbing every act, every word, even the unspoken. Lionel's moment of anger, a mindless outburst fueled by frustration, became an unintentional lesson for young Jeffrey. It taught him that life could be taken in a single, careless moment. It introduced him to the intoxicating feeling of control over something small and defenseless. In sociology, we call this modeling behavior. It's the idea that children learn by observing the actions of those around them. And in psychology, we know that early experiences like this can lay the foundation for lifelong patterns. For Jeffrey, that one act of violence wasn't just an isolated incident. It became a building block in the twisted architecture of his mind. What's chilling is that Lionel likely never gave it a second thought. To him, it was just a bad night, a regrettable moment. But to Jeffrey, it was the spark that lit a fire he couldn't extinguish. This isn't to say that Lionel's actions were the sole cause of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes. Human behavior is complex, a tangled web of nature and nurture. But moments like these, they matter. They linger. And they can sow seeds that grow into something dark and unrecognizable. A lesson for all of us about the weight our actions carry, even when we think no one is watching. Sometimes a single moment can alter the course of a life forever. For Jeffrey, that moment came at 6 years old when a routine surgery planted the seeds of something far more sinister. Act 2, the change. At 6 years old, Jeffrey underwent hernia surgery. It's a mundane detail in the grand scheme of his crimes, but I'd argue this was the first crack in the dam. When you study trauma in sociology, there's a term, the pivotal moment. For Jeffrey, waking up after that surgery might have been it. Now let's modernize this. Imagine today's child psychologists stepping in. They might have noticed the abrupt change in his demeanor. Once lively, now withdrawn. A modern intervention could have flagged Jeffrey as a child in crisis. But back then, it was chalked up to kids being kids. And so, his isolation grew, feeding his dark thoughts like dry kindling to a flame. Jeffrey's fascination with life and death emerged in the most disturbing way during his teenage years, when he turned his backyard into a macabre laboratory. Act 3, the animal collector. By the time the Dahmers moved to Bath, Ohio, Jeffrey's peculiar hobbies had escalated. Dead animals became his treasures, their lifeless bodies an obsession. Let's imagine Lionel, the chemist, showing his son how to bleach bones. He likely saw it as bonding. Science meets curiosity. But what if Lionel had paused to consider the psychology behind it? Would modern forensic psychology have screamed, "Red flag"? And here's where our reimagining gets dark. What if one of those animals wasn't entirely dead when young Jeffrey brought it home? What if that fascination turned into experimentation, hidden deep in the woods? We'll never know, but it's a chilling thought. Every serial killer has their breaking point, the moment when dark fantasies become grim reality. For Dahmer, that moment came in the summer of 1978 with a young hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Act 4, the first kill. Fast forward to June 1978. Jeffrey is 18 and home alone in that quiet Ohio house. His parents' divorce is final, and the loneliness has settled in like a dense fog. Along comes Stephen Hicks, hitchhiking on the side of the road. We know the story. Dahmer lures Hicks home, they drink, and when Hicks tries to leave, Dahmer bludgeons him with a dumbbell. But let's linger on that moment of panic. Was it premeditated, or was it pure impulse? What do you think? Now imagine Hicks as more than just victim number one. A fictionalized version of Stephen might have been a musician, his guitar strapped across his back. Maybe he told Dahmer about his dreams of making it big in Los Angeles, unaware he was confiding in a killer. Adding these layers of humanity doesn't just make the story more gripping, it reminds us that these victims were people with lives, not just names on a list. In true crime, we often look back and wonder, what if? What if modern policing had been in place during Dahmer's spree? Would one critical decision have stopped the horror before it began? Act 5. The modern police force. Let's take a hard turn into the realm of modern policing. Jeffrey's near capture in the Conorak Synthosom phone case is one of the most damning examples of systemic failure in criminal justice. 2 officers handed a drugged, bleeding 14-year-old back to a man they saw as harmless. But what if this happened today? Imagine body cameras capturing the scene. Picture a rookie cop fresh out of the academy, trained to recognize signs of abuse. Maybe this officer hesitates, insists on questioning Dahmer further. The scene escalates. Backup arrives. What unfolds could be the domino that topples Dahmer's killing spree. But in 1991, the system failed, and a boy was returned to his predator. Picture this. The humid Milwaukee night was tinged with a faint, metallic scent, the kind of smell that lingered after a storm. Officer Sarah Green, a fresh-faced rookie, barely a year into the job, adjusted her hat nervously as she approached the scene. The call had been vague, something about a young man in distress, found wandering the street. But the look on the 2 women's faces as they waved her down told her this was no ordinary situation. "Over here," one of the women called, her voice tight with urgency. "This boy, he's hurt." The boy was slumped against the brick wall of a nearby building, shirtless and shivering despite the warm night air. He looked impossibly young, barely a teenager, with bruises dotting his arms and a glazed, frightened look in his eyes. Officer Green crouched down, her heart pounding as she took in the faint chemical smell on his skin. "Hey, buddy," she said softly, keeping her tone calm. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. His lips trembled, his body rigid with fear. Sarah glanced up at the 2 women. "Did he say anything?" "No," one of them replied, arms crossed tightly. "But that man over there," she gestured to a figure approaching from the shadows. "He said the boy's his boyfriend. But he looks like a kid. Something's not right." The man in question stepped forward, his demeanor unnervingly casual. Jeffrey Dahmer. Sarah noted his calm smile, the way his eyes flicked toward the boy with something that wasn't quite concern. "Officer," he said, his voice steady, almost charming. "This is my friend. He just had too much to drink. I was about to take him home." Sarah's training kicked in, but so did her gut. Something about Dahmer's presence set her on edge. The calculated way he spoke, the stiffness in his movements. She glanced back at the boy, who met her gaze for just a moment. His eyes, wide and pleading, told her everything she needed to know. "Sir," Sarah said, standing, "I'm going to need you to step back while we get him some help." Dahmer's smile faltered. "That's not necessary. He's fine. Really." Sarah didn't budge. "We'll let a doctor decide that." Her partner, Officer Rodriguez, arrived on the scene, casting a skeptical glance between the boy and Dahmer. "What's going on here?" Sarah straightened, her voice firm. "We're taking the boy in for medical evaluation. And I'd like to have a word with Mr. Dahmer back at the station." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. As the boy was helped into an ambulance, Sarah noticed Dahmer's expression shift, his composure cracking just slightly. For the first time, he looked afraid. Back at the precinct, Dahmer sat in a sterile gray interrogation room, his hands folded neatly on the table. Sarah watched him through the one-way glass, her nerves buzzing. She'd seen suspects feign calm before, But Dahmer's was different. Meticulous. Practiced. When she entered the room, he greeted her with the same disarming smile. "Am I under arrest, officer?" "Not yet," Sarah replied, taking a seat across from him. She leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "But I do have some questions. For starters, how does a 14-year-old end up drunk and half-naked in your apartment?" Dahmer shrugged, the picture of nonchalance. "He came over willingly. We're friends. He just drank too much, that's all." "And you didn't think to call for help when he collapsed?" "I didn't want to embarrass him." Sarah's jaw tightened. She wanted to lash out, to slam her hands on the table and demand the truth. But instead, she let the silence stretch, watching as Dahmer shifted in his seat. She noticed the faint tremor in his hands, the way his gaze darted to the mirrored glass behind her. "What's your relationship with him?" she asked finally. Dahmer hesitated, just for a second. It was enough. Sarah leaned back, letting her words hang in the air. In that moment, a rookie officer's instinct changed everything. The boy, 14-year-old Konorak, was saved. Dahmer exposed. But the ripples didn't stop there. Society demands answers when monsters like Dahmer come to light. How could someone like him operate undetected for so long? The media descended on Milwaukee, dissecting every detail of Dahmer's life, every failure of the system that allowed him to slip through the cracks. For Dahmer, the mistake was catastrophic. His carefully constructed facade had been cracked open, his control wrestled from him. He returned to his apartment that night with shaking hands and a mind racing with thoughts of failure. Failure, for Dahmer, wasn't just a setback. It was an existential threat. Killing wasn't just compulsion. It was his identity. And now, he had been seen, caught, judged. The newspapers screamed his name the next day, his face plastered on every television screen. He stayed inside for weeks, paranoia eating away at him. Every time he stepped outside, he felt the eyes of strangers burning into his back. He stopped visiting the bars, stopped inviting anyone home. The silence of his apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive. But monsters adapt. Slowly, Dahmer began to rebuild. He studied his mistakes with the precision of a scientist. Too careless. Too confident. His next victim would require more planning, more caution. Failure wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a darker, more meticulous phase of his killing spree. And what of society? Dahmer's slip-up wasn't just a wake-up call for him. It was a reckoning for Milwaukee. The community demanded reform. Better training for officers, more resources for vulnerable populations. For every life Dahmer took, his exposure saved countless others by forcing change. Failure is a strange thing. For most of us, it's a chance to grow, to learn. But for someone like Dahmer, it's a challenge, a problem to solve. This glimpse of vulnerability, this one moment of being caught, might have saved lives in the short term, but it also showed us how dangerous a monster can become when they're forced to evolve. Even the most seasoned professionals can miss the signs, but sometimes guilt can ignite a fire for redemption. What if one journalist had dug deeper into the stories that everyone else ignored? Act 6, The Journalist's Redemption. Now let's explore a fictional angle. Picture a journalist who dismissed earlier reports of missing young men in Milwaukee. Let's call her Claire. She's seasoned but cynical, jaded from years of chasing dead-end leads. When Dahmer is finally caught, Claire is rocked by guilt. How did she miss it? How did everyone miss it? She dives into the case with renewed purpose, interviewing families, poring over police reports, and retracing the victim's final steps. Her quest for redemption becomes its own story, a narrative of accountability, both personal and systemic. In the end, Jeffrey Dahmer's world spiraled into a chilling abyss where control and chaos merged. But what drove this descent, and what truths linger in the darkness? Act 7, The Descent. Back in Dahmer's apartment, the darkness deepens. Let's fictionalize one of his final nights. Imagine him staring at the Polaroids of his victims, their dismembered bodies frozen in time. What does he feel? Regret? Satisfaction? Nothing? This is where sociology and psychology intersect. Dahmer's need for control wasn't just about physical domination. It was about erasing his own isolation. His crimes were a grotesque attempt to fill the void within him, a void that society failed to see or address until it was far too late. And there you have it, a reimagined, dramatized descent into the mind and methods of Jeffrey Dahmer. We've explored his story through modern lenses, from the missed opportunities in his childhood to the systemic failures that let him slip through the cracks. So what's the takeaway? Evil doesn't exist in a vacuum. It festers in the shadows of neglect, oversight, and silence. If we learn anything from revisiting these cases, it's that paying attention, truly paying attention, can mean the difference between life and death. That's a wrap for this week's episode of The Guilty Files, True Crime Rewritten. I hope you enjoyed this fictionalized dive into a case that already had plenty to intrigue and inspire. Whether it's uncovering the hard facts or exploring the possibilities, we love giving you two hosts, one crime, and double the story. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Brian's episode, The Guilty Files Tales of a Crime, where he laid down the straight facts with precision and professionalism. It's the perfect foundation for the twists and turns we explored together today. Because here at The Guilty Files, we believe every crime deserves two stories. A huge thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in and making this all possible. Your curiosity, intrigue, and passion for true crime creates the space for us to tell these stories. When you listen, share, and engage with our content, you're the heartbeat of this show. So keep that guilty pleasure alive. Tell your friends, post about the show, and let us know your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Reach out to me anytime via email at Dani, D-A-N-I, at paranormalworldproductions.com. And don't forget, this episode was brought to you by the talented team at Paranormal World Productions Studio. Their commitment to professional and high-quality storytelling is what makes The Guilty Files possible. Visit www.paranormalworldproductions.com to learn more about the show, the studio, and everything we're working on behind the scenes. We'll be back next week with more true crime, revisited and reimagined. You don't want to miss the next chapter of our storytelling journey. As always, keep exploring justice through fact and fiction. Thanks for listening to The Guilty Files, and until next time, stay suspicious. Keep it guilty. Just be sure to keep your alibis airtight and maybe delete your browser history. The story's done, but the intrigue never ends. See you next week for more Guilt and Glory. I'm Dani, signing off.